G'day, how's it going? My name's Ian and I'm the SALT Communications Manager. I want to talk to you today a little bit about psychological first aid and what to do if you're becoming a little bit unwell yourself, or if you're working with a client who is a little bit unwell. And there's a few kind of key things you can do. So there's a few different types of unwellness, I suppose, that we could talk about. One of the first signs of people being unwell, or one of the first types, of unwellness, are when people are basically losing touch with reality, and they have an altered state of reality that's kind of different to everyone else's. And if this is long standing, it can be very problematic. And then there's another type of unwellness where people get very energetic and very high and very grandiose, and they might get paranoid, and they might get a bit delusional, and they might think the whole world's out to get them, and they might be running around and not sleeping, and that's kind of like more of a psychosis type of unwellness. And then the third type of unwellness is kind of like, and there's another one as well I should talk about as well, but the third type of unwellness is obviously a kind of like a clinical depression, in a sense that maybe life is kind of okay in a lot of ways, but they're really, really, really feeling really, really down. Or it can be that a whole bunch of really terrible things have happened and they're feeling really, really down. And I suppose the fourth type of unwellness is what you would call the borderline personality disorder, which is kind of, this whole idea of just, getting in a lot of fights with people, getting in a lot of arguments with people, people, being obsessed with what people think about you, and, and kind of not being able to handle how you come across, and or people's opinion of you. And so there's all these different types of different unwellness. But what can you do if these things are happening to you, and what can you do if you're a worker and someone you're working with is showing some of these signs? Well, the first thing that you need to do is be non-judgmental, because ultimately a lot of people who experience psychological trauma are people who have, or what we call psychological distress, are people who have experienced trauma. So if someone's been a victim of sexual abuse, or if someone's had a close family member die, or if someone's been in a series of tragic situations, or another one could be a lot of people who have psychological distress are people who can have a drug or alcohol problem, and so that can trigger, it strikes me as interesting how some people can use substances and get away with it, but others can't. So we all might have met an old hippie who smokes a bit of weed, and he kind of never seems to bother him. But then we meet a young 25-year-old who smokes for a few years and they end up in a psychiatric hospital. So obviously drugs and alcohol can affect different people. Some people can get away with it, some people can't. But the key thing is to be non-judgmental, and the key thing also is not to try and offer a solution, but to ask questions. So, how you going? How you feeling? How are things for you at the moment? What are your thoughts? What are you thinking? Is there anything I can do to help? Now, if someone is really at an acute stage, if it's really boiling over, and especially with the psychosis where people are irritable and they might be screaming and arguing and storming off and smashing things, the best course of action that you can really take is to call the crisis assessment treating team for a person like that. And that's not a bad thing to do. That's not something that you do and you go, I feel bad about doing that. That's actually a loving thing to do, is to call some expert help. If someone is feeling suicidal, it's good to ask some questions. What can I do to help? And are you planning on carrying this out? And then there's also, kind of trying to encourage them to maybe ring Lifeline. But these are problems that you don't try and solve. You try and be very non-judgmental. And also, the funny thing about mental illness is that, it doesn't discriminate. It can affect everyone. And so, listen, be patient, show love, but also, really importantly, be prepared to act if you think it's getting out of control. This is not like someone who's, say, psychotic, who might get an intervention from the police or from the crisis assessment treating team, the CAT team, they might, dislike you for doing that. But ultimately, in the end, they will thank you for it, once they get recovery and once they get better. And someone who is, suicidal, and really determined to act on it, obviously needs an intervention as well. And so you need to be prepared to make those calls and make those phone calls and kind of get people involved. So Lifeline's very good people to ring. If it's a really acute case, where someone is completely psychotic and running around and crazy and, walking naked down the street and yelling and screaming and throwing things and, whatever, then it's the police and it's the crisis assessment treating team. It might be beyond blue for some people. You can also ring the Victorian Mental Illness Awareness Council. If you become a patient in a psychiatric unit and you're involuntary, which means that by law you have to be there, you can call the Victorian Mental Illness Awareness Council. So, but the key thing is that mental illness is not beyond any of us. We are all susceptible to mental illness, and I hope this video has been helpful. And look after yourselves. Know your own signs. And also look out for the signs of others. This is a difficult time for a lot of people with, the COVID-19 time. A lot of people are isolated. So the key thing is just to be loving, patient, non-judgmental. Don't try and solve the problem and ask lots of questions. That's the key. That's all I've got time for. I've been Ian, the SALT Communications Manager, signing off.